Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Research 411, a talk show focused on sharing best practices and trending research topics delivered by professional staff and prominent UT Dallas researchers from various disciplines. I am Tiffany Willoughby, Manager in the Office of Research for Education Programs, Outreach, and Events. My presenters today are Amanda Boone, Institutional Review Board Director, Office of Research, and Matt Winsler-Johns, Assistant Director, LGBT Programs at the Galerstein Gender Center. Amanda, Matt, welcome.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thank you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
You bet.
So
Matt,
excited.
can you go ahead and share a little bit with us today about your role and what you have to offer to the UT Dallas community, please?
Yes, absolutely. Well, hello, everybody, and I hope everyone is doing the best we can at home. And I know we're all just kind of in survival mode and just doing the best that we can. So I just would continue to encourage everyone to just survive and do the best we can. That's all we can do right now. But yeah, as Tiffany said, I am the Assistant Director for LGBT Programs in our Gender Center. And our center has been around since 1996 at UT Dallas. And we serve women and LGBT communities at UT Dallas. And you might ask why that's very specific. So as you can probably guess by the title of today's presentation of vulnerable populations, those are two different populations, especially at UT Dallas, that on a daily basis, we make sure that we are focusing our efforts through different education, programming, and advocacy efforts, that we make sure everything is equitable for those different communities. So as you can probably guess by my title, we have different people in our office, but my specific job in my office is focusing on our LGBT plus students, faculty, and staff, which I absolutely love. Since I identify in the LGBT plus community myself, it's not only my job, but it is my personal passion. So sometimes I can't believe I get paid for this because I wouldn't do it for free, but I love doing it. So I'm happy to be doing it. So with saying that, some of the things that I get the great pleasure to do is I get to focus in on educational opportunities such as Safe Zone. Hopefully you've attended Safe Zone Alley training. If you haven't, knock on wood when we're back on campus someday soon. Those are some trainings that you can attend where we focus on knowledge, terminology, and of course, some ally skills that you can acquire during our training. So if you're not able to attend those trainings, we do mini micro trainings called mini workshops where we can come to your staff or to your student group or whoever, and we focus in on just kind of mini trainings where we give you, LGBT 101 or transgender 101 to give you basic terminology to help you in whatever endeavor of area of campus that you are doing to make sure that you are really focusing on that area of campus to do your best. And then of course, Ally 2.0, that is an advanced training once you've attended Safe Zone Ally training to make sure that you are continuing your education. And then just to give you an idea of some different advocacy efforts our office has done before, you might have noticed when we were on campus, some of those single stall restroom signs. So we have, as of my last recollection, we had 54 single stall restrooms across our big campus. And back in 2015, I believe, those were gendered restrooms. And those single stalls just included a toilet, a mirror, a sink, and a lock on the door. That's all they were. So we worked with administration to get the signs changed on the restrooms to just a picture of a toilet in a single occupancy use because they were gendered for no reason. So many people are having to wait on a restroom, and there's no reason why it was gendered. So we worked with administration to just make them single occupancy restrooms because especially many of our trans and non-binary students, faculty, and staff don't always feel comfortable using the big restrooms out of fear for their safety. So we wanted to provide a space for everybody on campus just to have their privacy. We also worked with our registrar and our administrators on campus to provide preferred name option, so our students weren't getting dead named. So I'm going to use some terminology today, which I will define, but dead naming is when you use somebody's name they were assigned at birth that does not align with their identity. So instead of saying, here's your first ally tip, well, instead of saying, what's your real name? Or, oh, this is the name that was on my roll, or this is the name that's in your profile, here in the system, that is known as, especially a transgender person's dead name. So instead of saying, what's your real name? You can say, what is your chosen name? So we've worked with PeopleSoft to make sure there's a field called preferred name where somebody can actually put a name in there where you don't dead name them. And then of course our non-discrimination policy. We're one of the few universities in our nation that actually includes gender identity, gender expression, and of course sexual orientation. So later on today I'll describe what those mean. And then just very quickly, some of the programs that we do to affirm our LGBT plus campus community are National Coming Out Day, our Lavender graduation program, which is coming up, and we're doing a virtual situation this year, as you can imagine. We do something that called QTs, which stands for Queer Teas, which we do just different topics a couple times a semester. And then, of course, our Dallas Pride Parade, which is coming up in June. We still don't know if, well, they moved it to July, but we don't know if they're going to have it this year. But UT Dallas is always represented. So those are just some examples of how we really make sure that we are not only just supporting our LGBT plus community, but we are very in front of people just representing our community. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded, but yeah, that's who I am, and that's kind of what we do on campus. Thank
Fabulous, you. Matt. I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins over to Amanda, allow her to introduce herself, and then we can figure out how your two worlds intersect.
Hi, I'm Amanda Boone, as Tiffany mentioned, and I am the director of the Institutional Review Board office here on campus. We are within the Office of Research, research compliance specifically, and what the Institutional Review Board is really tasked with on campus is to take a look at all of the research protocols, all the research studies that involve human subjects participants. So if an investigator wants to collect data directly from a human participant for like surveys or interviews, that type of thing, or whether or not they are using data that was collected for other purposes and now they want to use that in their research study. We call those human subject participants. So when there are human subject participants in a research study, the IRB is really going to look at those studies and make sure that it's conducted in a way, the study is conducted in a way that does not harm the individuals, the participants themselves. And then our office is kind of the administrative arm of the Institutional Review Board, and we just make sure that everything is in compliance with the Institutional Review Board and all those fun regulations and laws and all of that stuff. So that is really why we are here here on campus. So one of the reasons why I am really glad to have this platform and be able to talk to individuals is that we are seeing more and more studies who really want to kind of tap into the LGBT plus community here at UT Dallas, whether that be investigators within the institution or outside entities want to come in and kind of tap into our LGBT plus community. And so I thought it would be really great to, have Matt come on and kind of give us kind of more of an insight, because that is such a special population, and the issues and the obstacles that they face on a daily basis are completely unique to that community. And so I'm really thankful that Matt is here to kind of give us some of that information. That as a researcher, it's really important to know the population that you want to tap into, that you want to ask those questions and collect that data from, and kind of design that study so that with that population in mind and their needs in mind.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And Matt, if maybe you could talk about some of the language that you would like to see in some of the human subjects research protocols that individuals and researchers would like to submit to the IRB.
I love that. Thank you so much for that question. And honestly, I just want to echo what both of you have said. It's so important that we do cross paths more because as we were actually talking yesterday, I made the joke, if you only knew how many emails our office gets, like, we would like to survey your students, more so from off campus, just so many different, grad students or outside companies. And while I love to hear so much research going on finally for our LGBT plus people in the world, it can also cause a big problem because most of the time I'll scan the research and I will find so much problematic language. And here's the thing. I know a lot of the time it's unintentional. And I know that a lot of people don't have the intention to be like, I'm going to survey these people and I'm going to get them. But there are those people out there. So I think my biggest piece of advice is before we do any kind of survey where you're really trying to get data on LGBT plus people is spend some good time, going to trainings or, I'm here on campus and not only is it my job, but I really do love doing consultations and advising on language. Like I really do love it. And I never find it annoying anything when people reach out. I really find it to be something that I really enjoy. So if you find yourself in a moment where you're just trying to like, hey, is this the right way to word this? I don't want to come across rude. Please know that you can always reach out to me and I would love to do that. Just to give some good pointers, I know that anytime we start with any type of survey, I'll give you a good example. When we do our Safe Zone Ally training, at the very end, in the sake of research and assessment, we of course want to know how our training was perceived and how it was going. So when we collect data, we want to make sure, while we're collecting our data, why are we collecting the data? Is it important that we have that data? And how are we collecting it? So my biggest piece of advice, and I know this isn't always feasible, but my biggest piece of advice is, putting gender identity and putting a blank line. Because when you do that, when you let your subject self-identify who they are and how they identify, instead of giving a drop-down menu that you run the risk of not listing their identity or even mislabeling their identity, it shows them that, oh, I'm not going to fill out this survey. They didn't, I'm going to tear this up. I'm not going to waste my time. But when you show the solidarity of just drawing a blank line and saying gender identity, instead of saying, and I run the risk of making this joke because like everything we do at the university and the driver's license office puts sex, M or F, or even gender, M or F, male or female. So think about how many times that you have had to circle M or F when you go get your driver's license, like I said, when you go to the doctor's office, when for me, I was assigned male at birth and I identify as a man. So I don't know if you've heard the term cisgender, but I identify as cisgender because my sex is assigned at birth and my gender identity align. So when they align, you're known as cisgender. Now, if my sex assigned at birth did not align with my gender identity, that would be known as transgender. So for someone that's transgender, when they're constantly having to circle M or F, that is troubling because many of the times, especially here in Texas, we're talking about what you were assigned at birth. Now, here's the thing about UT Dallas. We do have a way for you to change your gender marker, which is referring to M or F, without having to have legal paperwork to prove that. But here's another caveat to that. We only have two options, M or F. Now, I keep saying transgender, and I do want to take a quick pause moment if I can, and I have just 4 terms that I want to define, because I know I'm speaking to my beautiful research people and I want to give some research terms. So the Human Rights Campaign, hrc.org, they have some beautiful research that they have done. It's very reputable and it's always up to date. So back in the end of 2019, so not that long ago, they have something, known as their glossary of terms that they constantly update. So before I keep giving off a lot of these terms, I would like to just quickly define them. So gender identity is one's innermost concept of self as male, female, a blend of both or neither, how individuals perceive themselves or what they call themselves. One's gender identity can be the same or different from their sex assigned at birth. So that might be a new concept. You might understand that one. Sexual orientation, this one's a little bit more known in our society. That is defined as an inherent or immutable, enduring emotional, romantic, or sexual attraction to other people. Now, 2 other terms I would like to quickly define. Gender expression, that is defined as external appearance of one's gender identity, usually expressed through behavior, clothing, haircut, or voice, which may or may not conform to socially defined behaviors and characteristics typically associated with being either masculine or feminine. And then the last term I would like to quickly define is just transgender. So this is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or expression is different from the cultural expectations based on their sex that they were assigned at birth. So being transgender does not always imply any specific sexual orientation. Therefore, transgender people may identify as straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. So the big notes there is that your gender identity is completely different than your sexual orientation. So when we are asking key things like this on surveys or research, it's so important just to take a step back and understand what these terms mean. And I hope that small lesson was helpful, but my biggest piece of advice is before we start jumping into the survey and how we're going to ask the questions, it's really important when we're looking at a vulnerable population, to understand who they are. And you have people on campus that can guide you through that, and I'm more than happy to do that.
And Matt, it's not only when you're targeting the community, the LGBT plus community, but it's also if you just want to get just a sample of the community, you want it to be representative of the current community, the society that we have. I think it's important to think about that as well. Even if you're not targeting a specific group, just keep in mind that there are individuals who in society who don't, they don't identify as male or female. There are other identities out there, and so it's important just to keep that in mind with any research project that you are conducting.
Right. I think that is, and that can be really difficult for our society to understand because, think about it, even being in Target, you walk down the aisles and see, the boy toy aisle and the girl toy aisle. Everything in our society points to just men and women. So when we're doing research that jumps outside of our quote unquote norms, it can be difficult. But if I can just very quickly, I knew I was going to be talking to my friends in research, so I did not want to come to you without some research. I wanted to come correct. So just very quickly, and this is going to be later on in the presentation. I also came with some research for you to take home with you. So HRC released a beautiful report called Growing Up LGBT in America. And this is a report that they did. They surveyed more than 10,000 LGBT identified youth between the ages of 13 and 17. And the reason why I think this particular survey was so important to talk about today is that as we work in a college environment, these are the particular age groups that you're going to be surveying as they come from high school to the college group, traditionally at least. So just very quickly, I just have 4 statistics to share with you to show why this particular group would be known as a vulnerable population. So Based on this survey they just did in 2019, 92% of the respondents, so keep in mind 10,000 people, 92% of these LGBT youth say that they hear negative messages about being LGBT. And the top sources of these negative messages are from school, internet, and their peers. And then 73% of LGBT youth say they are more honest about who they are online than they are in the real world. So that particular statistic I thought was interesting for today's discussion, because if your survey is done the right way, they might be more apt to be honest, because if they are more honest online and they feel like your survey is being done, authentically, and they know the results are not going to be publicly shared, and they feel like, okay, like I feel comfortable with this survey, they're going to potentially be more honest in their findings, and your results can be, I don't know, it'd be interesting to see your results. Now, before, I do not like to get political in these discussions. I don't find it fruitful because, but it is important to note that we're in Texas, and this particular statistic was 68% of LGBT youth say they hear negative messages about being LGBT from elected leaders. And keep in mind, this specific statistic was nationwide, so I don't know what it is in Texas specifically. And then the last statistic I would like to read today is LGBT youth are twice as likely than their peers to have been physically assaulted, kicked, or shoved. So when we're talking about vulnerable, we're not just talking about verbally assaulted. We're talking about physically assaulted, but also if you look at the rates of Black transgender women that are being killed, it's astonishing how many of them are being killed in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. And of course, that statistic is very layered. So keep in mind when we're surveying these people and get sample populations, you're not just surveying them being LGBT, you're also surveying their race or their gender identity. You're not just surveying them being assaulted for being LGBT. You're surveying them being assaulted for being a woman or for being Black. So that's so important that we remember that this is so intersectional as well.
And Matt brought up a really good point that, when you're doing these surveys, a lot of times they're giving information that they don't share with people in their daily lives. Some of their closest family and friends might not know the answers to some of the questions that they're answering for the survey or for the research study. And so when you're talking about security and data security and how you are accessing that and storing that data and how you're analyzing that data, it's really, really important to make sure that all of that is just really locked down and that you have a really good handle on how that data is secured. There's, even if you're doing a simple survey and you have questions on it as gender, some people might not think that that's damaging at all. And so, it particularly wouldn't be for me because, I've been, I'm cisgender and it's not particularly damaging for me, but it would be for other people. So it's really important to have that in mind about the data and how you're keeping it secure and all of that to really minimize the risk and the harm that can come to individuals who are answering your questions and being really honest with you and your research.
I do have another one in the queue for Amanda. Does UTD or UTS have current policies to protect our LGBT plus community or vulnerable populations when conducting research, whether it's internally or externally? And I'm going to send Amanda live to answer that question.
That is a really good question, and I believe UT system. And when we're talking about research, everything that we do is really based on, well, the IRB. Everything the IRB does, and when we're looking at research studies, we have regulations that guide us, and laws and all of that stuff. Which brings me to an important definition that I kind of wanted to bring out and highlight is the definition of vulnerable populations. So in the regulations, there are extra protections for what they term as vulnerable populations, specifically ones who cannot make determinations on their own about whether or not they want to be in a research study. And that would be like children or people who might be incarcerated or in some sort of facility, or who might have some sort of mental limitation of that. So there are extra protections for those individuals. The LGBT plus do not fit into that definition. They would, what makes them vulnerable is the sensitive nature of the research itself. And also that if there are conditions in place that might make them feel like they don't have a decision, like they cannot say no to their research study, that would make them vulnerable as well. And so when we're talking about policies and things in place to protect the LGBT plus community specifically, what we have are regulations and policies that help protect all human participants, regardless of who they are, what their reality is. And so when the IRB takes the research study and is looking at that, what they're looking at is many, many different layers. They're looking at what is it that you want to study, what are the questions that you're asking, how are you storing the material, how are you conducting the recruitment, are there any conflicts of interest in place, is there any bias that you can perceive that might kind of skew the data and kind of affect participants that way. These are kinds of the things that they're looking at. What is the language that you're using? And when we have specific populations, we want to have somebody on the IRB who is looking at this and making determinations. We want to have somebody who has a really specific knowledge of that population. And so we do have an individual on our IRB who has a greater knowledge base than some of the rest of us, I would say. And so when we do get those kinds of studies, we send them to this particular reviewer, and really her insight is just fantastic. So those are the types of things that we do and we put in place to do the best that we can to protect any population that anybody wants to kind of tap into or access for research.
Great, thank you, Amanda. I do have another question for Matt. Matt, I have an individual asking, do you have any additional ally tips to share?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I would say my biggest piece of advice, especially in this moment that we find ourselves in, is to be there for people. And what I mean by that, especially right now, is to check in on people with a personal message. So you got to be careful about how you do the personal message, as a lot of our LGBT community is at home right now, or depending where they are, a lot of those spaces are not affirming. In fact, the Chronicle of Higher Education just released a really, really hard to read article that you will be linked with at the end of this presentation by Sarah Brown on April 24th of 2020. And just really emphasizing that college campuses can be crucial safe havens for students who spend their childhoods in the closet, secretive about their sexual orientation or gender identity, because they live and learn in unsupportive places. Most LGBTQ students report that they feel safer and they feel more included in college than they did in high school. They often come out in college once they find a more safe and supportive environment to explore their identity, but they might continue to hide it from their families. So in this moment where they might be home with those unsupportive families, not to say that all families are unsupportive, there are some supportive families, but I would check in on those people. Now, don't do it in maybe in a video chat where their parents might be sitting behind them or here. Do it in a supportive way that makes sense to that person. I would also use the name or the pronouns that they have asked you to use, but I would also ask them in what format that they want you to use. Say like, I know you're home right now. Do you want me to use the pronouns and the name that you told me to while we were at UTD, or what do you prefer me to do? And just to give you a really quick, another statistic, since I'm talking to my friends in research, in 2018, the Journal of Adolescent Health released 3 statistics that I think are, I put this on our social media all the time because I think it's one of the best statistics I've seen. Using a transgender youth's chosen name at work, school, with friends, and at home reduces their depression symptoms by 71%. It reduces their thoughts of suicide by 34%, and it reduces their attempts of suicide by 65%. So simply using the name and the pronouns that they have asked you to makes a massive impact. So checking in with them right now would make a world of difference.
Great, thank you, Matt. And I do have another question. Some research studies are trying to recreate results from previous studies. If the previous study focused on participants that were asked about biological sex only for demographic purposes only, how should I proceed with the gender question on a survey? We want to be respectful of the LGBTQ+ community. However, the study focuses on biological sex. How should we approach that? And I will leave this open to either of you to answer. Just let me know, or both at the same time.
You know, I am not a researcher, so please hear that. But I was in a classroom with Dr. Ginch, guest host teaching, I guess, in her human sexuality class. And I saw her do something that I thought was one of the best ally things. And it reminded me of your question. She read survey results. I guess it was in her textbook. And she said, before I read this, I just want everyone to know that when they collected this data, it's not done in the most affirming of ways. And in this classroom, we don't look at just sex assigned at birth. We look at gender identity. But I'm going to go ahead and read it for today's purposes. So I thought that was an interesting way because she had to like present the data because it was in the textbook. I don't know if that's the best answer to that, but I thought that was a really cool ally tip that Dr. Ginch did.
Amanda, did you want to speak to the question?
I think Matt's answer was great. Is there a way that you could ask both? Because if you need that data point to kind of, run the study again, maybe you ask that question, but then you ask something that is affirming as well, so that you can have that data point, but then you can expand upon it as well if you need to.
All right, and it looks like we have time for just one more question, and it is as follows. If we want to recruit LGBTQ+ participants for a research study, what can the Galerstein Gender Center do to help? Are we able to leave study flyers at the Galerstein Gender Center? Can our study information be sent out via email listservs or posted on the Galerstein Gender Center Facebook page? So perhaps Amanda can start by maybe answering the last of those 3 questions, and then I'll send it over to Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. The IRB will allow for recruitment at other sites as long as that site is okay with that. So as long as the individual who has the authority to make determinations for that center or for that outside site, if they're okay with doing it, absolutely. What we would request is that in the consent process, and it's very, very clear that this is not a
I'm sorry, Amanda. It appears we've lost you. Okay, and we're back.
Can you hear me?
We can't hear you though. There we go. Yes.
You can hear
now
me?
We can.
Okay. So
it's okay. Things like that happen.
So let me start over. What we would ask for when you're doing those types of studies is that you get the permission from the center. And so the person that is authorized to make those determinations on behalf of the center, if they're okay with posting things and sending out emails and all of that stuff, the IRB is not going to have a problem with that. What the IRB would ask is that it's very, very clear in anything that goes out that this study is not affiliated with that center, because what we don't want is we don't want to have that inducement, so that individuals feel like I have to do this, or the center is, you know, somehow going to find out the results of this, or, you know, something like that, that will make them feel like either they can't say no, or something else is going on, or they're, you know, the services that they'll get are, you know, going to be affected if they don't do it. So that's what the IRB would ask for.
Thank you, Amanda. I do believe we're having some technical difficulties, but I am going to go ahead and send Matt live and see if you have anything else you'd like to share related to the last question, and I am happy to repeat it if needed.
No, I was just going to say everything Amanda said was just spot on. I would say the amount of requests we get are pretty high, and we love to collaborate and we love to help as much as we can. What we don't want to do is make our LGBT plus students feel like we're constantly surveying them, because when you are a vulnerable population, you don't want to make them feel like we got more questions for you, because as you can imagine, when you're in a vulnerable population and you're constantly being surveyed, you do question like, well, who's surveying me? There has to be a level of trust there. So we will help as much as we can, as much as it makes sense. So I just want to echo everything that Amanda said. I think I can't say it as perfectly as she did. She hit it spot on.
Thank you, both Amanda and Matt. We appreciate your time and your talent, and I am certain that all of the attendees today have great takeaways. If you are interested in this information, it will be posted to our Office of Research webpage, and you can find them on research.utdallas.edu. Thank you and have a great day.